cult hackers, and welcome to the podcast. I'm Celine, a media graduate with an interest in cults.
And I'm her dad. I'm Stephen Mather. I'm an organisational psychologist these days. I was raised in a high control group or cult. Welcome to the podcast. Just a couple of little things. I've got the window open today. It's quite a warm day in the studio here. And I call it a studio. It's kind of like a roof space. Your ex-bedroom.
I was going to say, aka my bedroom of long past.
But I do have pigeons nesting outside the window, so you may hear the odd wood pigeon noise. So I do apologise if it does. But there you go. That's what indie podcasting is about. So there you go. That's it. So today we're going to talk about what, Celine?
Well, we're going to talk about the Truman Show because I was watching it and I was like, I wonder what like a culty kind of responses to this, like a cult reading of this would be. And so then I said about that to you on the when we were chatting, and then you said, oh yeah, we watched it like 2 days ago or something. Yeah, so it just so happened.
Coincidence. So I thought, yes, timing. Let's do that. It's something that we've thought about doing. So for those of you who haven't heard this type of episode before from us, we do every now and again do a cult reading of a movie. And yeah, we've talked about The Matrix before. We've looked at
Star Trek a lot.
Other things. Star Trek, yeah, that's right.
So the creepy one, what was it? When they go to Sweden.
Oh yes, Midsummer.
Yeah, that's pretty
so
cool.
We're trying to do like cult readings of popular films. So we don't necessarily think that the writer had a cult specifically in mind when they were writing or directing this, but the idea is that we just look at it through a cult lens, and then maybe towards the end, then we sometimes look at it in a sort of bigger picture and think about, what was it trying to say to the viewer anyway. So yeah, that's kind of the way it goes. We're not going to go scene by scene as such, but we are going to go through the film kind of chronologically. So if you haven't seen the Truman Show yet, obviously there are spoilers in this. Go and watch it first and then have a listen to this.
Yeah, bizarre if you haven't, but
yeah, where have you been if you've not seen the Truman Show? But sometimes people don't catch all these things. So yes,
it's on Netflix in the UK. So
it is on Netflix in the UK. Yeah, so it's actually known to be a very well received film. So definitely worth your time. We're going to give it a cult viewing, and the opening bit of the movie, you're not quite sure whether you're watching the credits for the actual movie or whether you're watching the credits for the imagined show called The Truman Show. And of course it is the latter. It's a kind of schmaltzy beginning, isn't it? And you get the creator of this show talking about it. So what did you take from that opening, Celine?
Well, the whole being watched thing, obviously, and I suppose at that point I think I appreciate it doesn't start with him not knowing at all. It starts with him already having the doubts. So we've spoken before about the doubts and all of the different metaphors people have for their doubts and how it slowly, the bag rips apart or it all shatters eventually, whatever metaphor you like to use about your realization of it all being false. So he's kind of already in that process.
You've got Christoph, who is talking about the show, isn't he? He's talking
about our narcissist cult leader.
Yeah, that's right. So I think there's something there that we should pick up first. So we've actually got the cult leader who is the showmaker in some respects. But what's interesting about this particular cult, if we want to call it a cult, which we are giving it a cult reading, is unlike most cults, whereas the leader, maybe one or two lieutenants, they kind of know what's going on, but the rest of the participants don't. With this, it's a bit different because actually everybody knows what's going on apart from just one person. So this is a cult of one, essentially.
Yeah, unless you want to
And-
take it how I did, and I took it
Go on.
that they're PMO, physically and mentally out.
Okay, go on.
You could
Explain
take it that way. Well, because some of them, like the dad that comes in, jumping ahead, but the dad kind of wants to be back in, and he's desperate to be back in, even though he knows it's not real. And these people are living their lives in this weird world, aren't they? So as much as they know it's not real, they are living there, like all the time, presumably.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Yeah, so they do realize it's all a show, but yeah, they are pretty much,
They
yeah.
are
I mean,
in it.
they're
as
in
much
it.
there as he is, in that everybody lives there, don't they? They don't leave.
Yeah.
As far as it's, maybe you do if you're a smaller actor, but the main cast, they live there. And the mum as well, when they're looking for him, she's like, he just needs to hear my voice and then he'll come back. That's a little bit delusional, maybe.
That's true. Yeah, so she feels like his mother, and his wife is obviously living a life with him. The other thing I wanted to say about Christoph, who is the show creator, I feel like he is all the time deluding himself, because he spins this whole thing as some sort of wonderful thing that he's done for Truman. He thinks that he's helped him to live a real life
and humanity.
Yeah, not like the fake life that he would live outside. So in a way, this is quite similar to cults. So it's like the leader themselves has their own story. They have their own story about actually what they're doing, and it's never a bad thing, is it? Of course, and they probably convince themselves that that's what they're doing. So I think that's what we can take from Christoph as well, is that he's convinced himself that he's doing Truman a favor here. So for those of you who haven't seen it before but would like to listen to the podcast, Truman is the center of this film. He's actually living in a reality show. He's the only one who doesn't know that it's a reality show. He was a baby. He was born into this environment, and he was raised being watched by millions of people around the world. So that's the conceit of the film. And he's the only one that doesn't know what's happening. He lives his life and everybody watches it. So, I mean, this was very prescient in a way, because obviously back in those days, there might be one or two reality shows, but they weren't very, very common. Maybe Big Brother just about started, but it was very prescient. I mean, now it's just reality TV.
Yeah,
everywhere.
I was going to say, though, even more scary, I think, is not the likeness to reality TV, because I do think on the most part people know that they're in the reality TV show. This is obviously taking it to the nth degree, but where I think it's even more to use your word, prescient, is when it is the baby vloggers, or like the YouTube reality TV, because the kids that for a long time don't know that they're in the reality show of their lives. They really are living the Truman Show. So that's kind of as well another reason I wanted to talk about it, because I think it was calling out probably what it could see directly in front of it, which was these kind of reality Big Brother style TV shows. But I think what it's, hopefully you watch it and horrifies you, is these YouTube channels that are where they have babies or adopt babies for the sake of putting them on their reality show of their lives.
Yeah, of course, we've got the Duggar family as well. The documentary we've mentioned a few times on that, and that was very much like that. I mean, they're all those children, they grew up in that environment, really. Of course, early on they wouldn't realise. And how do they come to terms with it as they start to notice that they're being watched all the time? So the whole way that things set up, I think, is quite interesting. Right at the beginning, you say that he's noticing things. I'm not sure he does right at the beginning, because he's got this kind of happy, he has this little catchphrase, which is good morning, and in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. This is his little catchphrase that he's obviously developed himself, and I think there's something here as well that is about a kind of repetitive life that he's leading. It's a kind of same again. He has this little catchphrase that he says to people. And at this point, he's living his life, same every day. And I think that the idea is that there's this battle going on within him, in that he's bored, basically. He's a bit bored just staying in this place. But on the other hand, he's got these hang-ups about leaving, which obviously we'll talk about.
Which is true, but I do think you realise that that's what's kind of suggested to you. But I do think personally that he is questioning. He's just not vocalizing, and it's all like that dissonance that everybody is living in. I think he's not completely bought in anymore, because I think he doesn't just want to go to Fiji because it would be a fun escape, because he's never gone anywhere, but he wants to go to Fiji because of that experience he has where this woman questions his entire existence, because apparently she's there. Obviously she's not, but that was the last he heard of where she might be. But yeah, I do think he's very early in that journey, if you know what I mean. Like, and that was, straight away I was like, oh, it's someone that's like living this life and they're in it, but we're very close to a crack.
Yeah, I mean the big moment that I think for me is when he starts to ask those questions is when the falling light happens.
Because that's early, isn't it? That's quite early.
So he's driving in the car, and then suddenly this thing falls out of the sky. It's got the word Sirius on it, which is the brightest star in the sky. So obviously this is one of the lights and the stars in the sky, and it falls to Earth. And obviously he's trying to work out where this thing's come from. It's actually a studio light, but he doesn't know what that means.
They sell it as, plane bits.
So the car radio, he gets in the car radio news says there's been some sort of accident, or a jet had to let some of its equipment go because of problems, and that's the explanation. So they're trying to make it up as they go along. Basically, they're trying to make up for whatever it is that's happening, and that's one of the things that they do. But this is the first moment, and I think this is where his cognitive dissonance first kicks in. So it's like, oh, that doesn't make any sense. How can I reconcile that? But it's so difficult for him to make any other sense of that, so he just accepts it. Then we see him doing what he does pretty much every day. He goes and buys magazines. Also, we get, and the magazine's quite interesting because he wants to get a very specific magazine because he's creating this collage. We don't know this at this point, but he's creating a little collage, trying to find the likeness of this girl that he met, which we'll get to in a bit. But that's why he's buying this magazine every day, and he's ripping pages from it. But also we see the way that this world keeps trying to sell stuff. So he kind of the twins, these two identical twins guys, sort of slamming them up against the wall so that the camera can see the advert. What can you say about that? The idea that everything's being sold all the time.
What, in terms of a cult lens, or in terms of?
I mean, I feel like if we're going to have to stretch it here, really. But I mean, obviously the wider interpretation of this is we're constantly being sold to. I guess a comment on capitalism. But if you're using a purely cultic lens on this and saying this is a cult, then I think you are constantly being sold to within a cult. You're constantly receiving a sales pitch, both in terms of the staying in the group and the importance of staying in the group, but then also doing extra things. So, when I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, it was, can you pioneer? Can you auxiliary pioneer? So spending extra time in the field ministry, knocking on doors. Can you help with building projects? Can you give more money to the organization? Can you? So there was always this suggestion that, you should be getting this, and you should be doing that, and you should be doing this. So I think there's like constant selling actually within these groups, whether that's religious or, of course, if it's like an MLM, let's say, then you're constantly being sold to. You have to invest in this, you have to invest in that. So you're always being sold to throughout. So I think for me that, you could kind of use that as a metaphor, really.
Yeah, definitely. And again, Another thing that just foreshadowed the YouTube world, because we've
Yeah.
had to put in place a lot of laws to
Yes.
make people express when they're marketing something to you.
Product placement is such a big thing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This video is brought to you by.
Exactly. Yeah. So we get a little bit of he talks about Fiji, and so we get to know that he really wants to go to Fiji. At this point, we don't really know why Fiji, other than it's kind of a long way away. So we just think it's because it's the other side of the world for him, really.
Because that's what he sells it as.
That's right.
Yeah,
exactly. He gets a job. So he's supposed to be an insurance salesman. I mean, that in itself is
life insurance specifically, I do believe.
Yeah, life insurance. And what, that is like your absolute waste of time, because it's not real life insurance, is it?
No.
He's just working for absolutely no point whatsoever. And again, there's something there, isn't there? When you're in a cult, you are just on this hamster wheel of activity for absolutely, well, generally no reason.
Well, he doesn't need to have a job because he's on a TV show. Obviously, he doesn't know that. But...
That's right. But that's, I think also very apt. So he gets asked to go to see a potential client, but this is going to mean he has to go across water. That's when we learn that he has this sort of phobia about crossing water, which we'll talk about why that is in a minute. So here's a question that I've listened to a few commentaries on the Truman Show. Obviously not cult commentaries, only we do that. But they've asked the question, why did the makers of the show get him or give him this job to go across the water, when actually they didn't want him to go across the water? They didn't want him to go outside of the island.
Remind him, isn't it? Because he was considering going away, obviously, to Fiji. So then they wanted to quash that by forcing him into his fear in a very uncomfortable, not good way.
Absolutely. So this is a reinforcement, isn't it, of his phobia? They're helping to reinforce it to make sure he doesn't leave the world, because obviously they need him to stay. So he sees a sunken boat. He obviously feels very nervous about going over the water, and obviously he doesn't do it. So he's once again, it's reaffirmed his phobia that he has. What I think is interesting as well is the way that his friends, his mother, his wife, they are constantly undermining him. Did you notice that?
Yeah, well, they don't really care what he has to say, do they? They're not interested. They just want him to stay, obviously.
Yeah, so he's got these ambitions, he wants to explore and he wants to do this, he wants to do that, and they're constantly undermining him. So of course we know the motivation, but I think again this is really good as a way of thinking about life in a cult. Certainly my life growing up was, don't have big ideas, and don't, what do you're not going to do that. Why would you think you could do this? And I think a lot of people growing up in cults, and also in controlling relationships, they experience this too. So it's, why would you want to do that? And you'll never be able to do that. And you're just full of dreams. You'll not be able to do this. All these ideas, all these suggestions you've got, they're just constantly dragging you down, sort of grinding you down so that you don't have any ambition. That is what it's like growing up in a cult. Just try to get rid of all that ambition, because they want you to stay within the confines of this organization.
Stay in your lane.
So one of the biggest reasons for this, of course, is the accident. So do you want to describe the accident, Celine? Then we can talk about it.
So he basically wants to go out to explore, doesn't he? And he goes on a boat trip with his dad, and then they kill his dad off. Just horrendous, really. So now he's got an extremely big PTSD event of seeing his dad get swept away to sea, as far as he's concerned. But presumably they, like, once his dad disappears enough, they ease off the waves and ease him in. And
that's right.
and they get his mum to say stuff like, "I don't blame you," but in a very like pointed, "I do 100% blame you. This is you bad child. Never try that again," kind of way.
Absolutely. So when I jotted down on my notes, FOG, FOG. Have you come across the acronym FOG, Celine?
No.
So I don't know who came up with this, so I can't claim to be the inventor of it. But FOG, fear, obligation, and guilt. So this is I think it's a really great way, it's a really good demonstration of how cults do this. So they make you fear, they create a sense of obligation, and they create a sense of guilt. So you've got it all there. So he's got this terrible fear of going across water because of what happened. They set up this pretend, he doesn't know though, he thinks his dad literally drowned in the sea, and that's created this phobic fear in him. He's absolutely terrified of crossing water. Come back to the obligation in a minute. The guilt bit, he feels guilt, and his mother in the show, obviously not his real mother, but the mother in the show reinforces that, as you say, by this passive aggressive, well, I don't, of course I don't blame you, that's obviously making sure that the guilt is there. And all that creates this sense of obligation. Well, it is really his fault, so he really needs to be there for his mother. He really needs to stay around because it's his fault ultimately that his dad died.
Yeah, because I think he tries to leave, doesn't he? At some other point, they mentioned that he wanted to go again at a different time, but his mother, quote unquote, was ill, so he had to stay.
Absolutely, and that's again so much like. I mean, it is a coercive relationship, so that's why this is a good choice of film to analyze, because essentially we have got a coercive relationship, and cults are coercive relationships on a larger scale. So yeah, that's what we're seeing. Yeah, again, we've got his wife doing this whole ad thing again with the knives and all sorts of other things. She's the one that uses that lawnmower. That's right. Yeah. And
even when it's like going terribly, like everything is like falling apart, and then she's like, "Do you want some cocoa?" and like goes in, and he's like, "Who are you talking to?" Just losing his mind.
So I thought that, again, we're stretching it a bit here, but I felt that was almost like a sort of thought-stopping cliche for her. It was like, I don't know what to do. Let's just go back to the thing that I know how to do. Yeah. Yeah, we could say that. Okay, so then next thing we see the girl. So we get to see the girl that he fell for. He's attracted to this girl. She's looking.
He keeps getting dragged away by like men in suits. Yeah.
That's right. Girl. So he's blocked all the time. So he's attracted to her. Obviously, she likes him. She's only an extra though, so she's not the one for him because she's not been recruited for that job. Yeah. So he's already decided who he's going to marry, and so everybody's sort of funneling him away from meeting this girl. And again, I think there's something there. When you're in these groups, often your sexual partners, your closest friends, you have these, at least if not chosen for you, and sometimes they are literally chosen for you, and you're very much funneled into, these are the people that you can be friends with, nobody else. So you're kind of funneled into that particular friendship. So yeah, he's not able to go out with the girl he actually would like to. Of course, she likes him and finds a way to talk to him in the library, and she says, "Look, we've got to go now," and they go off to the beach, where they kiss for the first time. And at that point, she tells him straight. She gives him the whole, or as much as she can, the truth.
In the time that she's got.
Yeah. So what did you think to his reaction on that?
Well, he's just bewildered, isn't he? Because it's all happening in a very chaotic way. There's not really time for her to explain it in any kind of like reasonable way. But it seems like it's in the back of his mind from then on. Like I say, that whenever things happen, it seems to be a point that he returns to.
Definitely. And I think this is a really important point in the film if we're going to give it a cult reading. So when you're in a cult, if somebody tries to explain to you that you're in a cult or that this belief system is nonsense, UFOs are not going to come and rescue you, or you're not going to live forever in paradise on earth, you're not going to meet your dead loved ones again at the graveside. If you try to explain to somebody that they almost cannot take it, especially if they were raised in it like Truman was. They cannot process it. It's too much to process. But what we do notice is that something stays. So definitely there's some sort of effects there. Now, I'm not giving anybody advice about how you should help wake somebody up, because I'm not experiencing that. I don't pretend to know the answers there. And a lot of experts do seem to say you shouldn't really challenge people directly like that. But I think back to my own experience, and I know that when people did challenge me in that way, or if I watched something on TV like Richard Dawkins or something, I would really hate him. I think he's awful. What an awful man. What he's saying, these terrible things. But there was something there, and I never forgot the things that he said. So sometimes there is a little seed that germinates then, and I think, yeah, you're right. It's at that point that things start to really start to shift in his brain. And of course he's fallen in love. He's got this girl as well that he really likes, and at this point he finds out that, well, her pretend dad comes and takes her away, and tells him, we're moving to Fiji. And that's quite interesting, because this is an attempt by the writers to try and kill that relationship stone dead, isn't it? But what happens?
Well, it just creates a fascination and a desire to go to Fiji, because they pick this furthest away place. It could have just said somewhere so close by. And so nothing. They could have picked somewhere so boring and nothing. They picked such a exciting, far-flung place. Yeah. Hits
Absolutely.
all the boxes for leaving.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it there's this thing about the human spirit, I think, comes across in the film in lots of levels. And there is something there about, you can try and kill somebody's spirit, but it's still there, really. And, this becomes an obsession with him. Fiji is the place he wants to go. And as you said, he didn't really tell anybody why it was Fiji. Of course, everybody knows, because they've seen him be told that it's Fiji. But in his world, he's kept this to himself, and he wants to go to Fiji because it's a long way away. But we know that,
and everybody knows.
And everybody knows, yeah. Then we find out about the collage that he's making. So we didn't quite understand that when we first watched the film, why he was buying these books and ripping these bits of paper out. But I thought one of the interesting things with that is that he's making this collage on the other side of the frame, which is the portrait of his wife.
What's interesting? The quote unquote the fake image, the one that's made up of lots of other bits, is more real than the image on the front.
How true. Yeah, absolutely.
If you're enjoying the podcast, you can support it by becoming a patron. You can support the podcast for just £1 or $1.50 and receive a variety of Patreon benefits as a thank you. Don't forget to share the podcast, follow, subscribe and rate the podcast on the podcast app you're using. A review is particularly helpful as it gets us recognised by new listeners. And finally, if you'd like to reach out to us and tell us about some cult hacking you've been involved in, or you just want to say hi, you can do so by going to culthackers.com and using the contact form. We love hearing from our cult hackers. Thank you for listening, and now back to the podcast.
He gets a bit more evidence. So he's listening to the radio, and all of a sudden, for some reason, the car radio starts
describing him and what he's doing and where he's going.
It's picking up on the microphones, isn't it? The radio mics. So that must. How can you rationalize that? But he tries to. There's more gaslighting. So they do
a little bit of gaslighting.
They do. Yeah, there's a lot of gaslighting, and he kind of accepts it, but definitely doubts are now really screaming at him, aren't they?
I love the big doubts really kick in when he goes to the elevator, the lift.
Oh yeah.
And he sees the back of the lift is a set, And obviously it's very quick, and you know that's why it's kind of difficult. But I love his wife trying to play that off, and just like, and it just fell, and you know, both of them looking at each other just like, it's like, I know that you know, and you know that I know, but neither of us are 100%, so we're just going to keep dancing around it, pretending that it's fine.
And that is exactly what happens in cults. You know it's rubbish. They know it's rubbish, really, deep down. It's all nonsense, and yet you just kind of keep going through the performance. I'm sure a lot of people that are in cults at some level, and we'll talk a bit more about that, because I think that's, in some respects, the bit right near the end is kind of related to that. So he's really starting to have doubts, and at this point he starts to test. So now he's actually doing a few experiments himself. He's actually trying to test the boundaries and see whether something's wrong here, and that's when he starts to well, first of all, he goes to his friends. Heartbreaking, really, the friendship he has,
because he actually trusts his friend.
He really does. Also, what made me laugh is every time he has a bit of a wobble, along comes his mate with his 6-pack of beer. It's like, and it's always the same type of beer. Here he is again, you know. Here's Marlon with his beer.
But was he because he says, oh, we've known you all my life, so I'm presuming that he was cast as a child actor, and he just lives there. So this is what I mean by they're all kind of a bit trapped as well, you know, just because they're quote unquote choosing to be there, as we've discussed in cults. Just because you know things doesn't, how much have you chosen to be there? Because also I wonder what the family of these people think, the ones that join later, like the wife that becomes a character. Can she ever go home? Presumably not, unless she goes on a holiday, you know. Absolutely. And I don't imagine that anyone goes on holiday, because they're trying to sell it as the best place ever. Why would you ever leave? So I guess if you're an actor there, you go there and you never leave. You join a compound, effectively.
You are joining a cult, aren't you?
Yeah, you join the Truman cult. And you all know, to a certain degree, but you've all bought into the cult that this is good and great.
That's right.
And something that you'd love to be a part of. And it's helping humanity because of, like, showing the reality of man, or whatever he spins it as. So
you're so right. That's really good observation. Yeah, absolutely.
So he's in a cult in that he's going through the whole waking up process, but like they're in it in a different way, I feel.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. They're also indoctrinated. Christoph is indoctrinating them.
Because you would never do this in a normal state of affairs and think it was good, but unless you're in a bit of a culty situation.
So we're good. Yeah, very good. Yeah, we see a bit more indoctrination now. So his wife and his mother, you know, sat on the settee there, or the sofa. They're showing
remind him of the good, happy, nice times. Right,
all these photographs, and then she says, "Your favourite TV show's on, and it's Show Me the Way to Go Home." And again, this is all like, oh, why would you want to go anywhere else? You know, why would you want to leave? Because the best place is home. And it's again, all this indoctrination, constant
and also trying to get him to have a baby. They're really onto the baby thing.
So emotionally trapping him even further. But he's still, so at this point he really is, doubts are massive now. So at this point he said, well, he follows his wife to the hospital, actually, and observes what is supposed to be an operation. Obviously, it's a bit farcical.
Yeah. And he sees this poor extra, like, shit herself because she thinks someone's about to actually cut her leg, because they drop something, don't they? And they're like, are we going to have to actually do this to make him believe, you know? How far will they go? Are they going to take my leg?
Makes me laugh because you get these few moments. There's that, and there's also like the bus driver who actually doesn't know how to drive a bus. Then they want him to drive the boat, and he doesn't know how to do that because he's just an actor. So you get to a point where he actually can't do any more because he doesn't know how to, which I think is quite funny. He notices his wife on one of the photographs. His wife's got her fingers crossed on their wedding day, on their wedding photographs, which suggests that she was lying when she made those vows. So again, more questions. The other thing I thought was quite interesting, he doesn't know this, but we get to see at this point lots and lots of angles that we haven't been shown before. So thinking about the movie making itself, we get to see cameras in the mirror, and then sort of cameras in holes and so on. So and I think that's quite interesting. So we're now being shown that he's literally being surveilled everywhere he goes. He's being watched. And I wanted to say something about that in relation to cults. So in cults, you're often surveilled by everybody else that's in the cult. It's one of the big things. Our dear friend Erica Bourneman, who has been on the show, she talked about how this was a big thing in the group she grew up in, Kwasi Zabantu. They were trained to snitch on each other, and snitching is a big thing in these groups. And I think you can very easily draw that parallel. You're being watched, surveilled all the time. If you make a single mistake, somebody's going to tell the others.
Yeah, you don't have friends, and that's something that's highlighted in The Handmaid's Tale as well. And that she's like, you're put with a friend, like a person, and it's immediately that it's not for you to have companionship and friendship, it's so you can watch each other.
That's right.
I think that
and that happens in totalitarian states, of course, as well. It happened in East Germany was perhaps one of the most well-known good example of a totalitarian regime, really. So he goes to the travel agent. He now is making active attempts to get away. So he's now trying to get out. So he goes to the travel agent. Computer says no. Basically, there's no flights until August, which is about a month away. So he rushes onto the coach because he thinks I can get away on the coach, and that's when, of course, the coach, in inverted commas, scare quotes, breaks down. So again, he's trying to get away, and there's lots of blockers. And again, if you're in a cult, this is what happens: block.
Another thing is that the guy running the show, the cult, says if he wanted to leave, he could leave. And then you proceed to watch them block him at like so many routes. And he's like, no, he's really got to prove it. He's got to nearly kill himself, and then I'll believe that he actually wants to leave. So
I want to read some of that, because that comes right at the end, and you're absolutely right. And we cast our mind back to this scene. It's not true, is it? He's physically being stopped.
By cars and and things, like when he's basically when he tries to like scare the shit out of his wife to blocked make her talk. Turn. Blocked at every turn, because I think he wants to make her talk, doesn't he? So he's just like, fine, if I get to leave, brilliant, because I want to leave, but if not, you're gonna talk, because I'm gonna drive this car like a lunatic.
And it's of course Jim Carey. We should say Jim Carey is Truman. We haven't given the names really of the actors, but he's brilliant in this part. He's perhaps the only actor that could play this in the way that he does. He's just brilliant in it. And he plays a great guy who goes kind of nuts. He does the same in Me, Myself, and Irene. But this film, he is actually losing his mind.
It's less funny this time than a lot of his stuff, because it's just like there's bits that are like that are funny, but it's not a comedy. A lot of what he does is a comedy. This is less so.
Absolutely, but and I think he is losing his mind at this point. And again, this is. And he
starts to question then, doesn't he? When he's really frightened, his wife, and the guy comes around, the best friend. I think he does feel a bit bad, doesn't he?
Yes, right. Yes, of course. He's behaved in a way that has frightened his wife, and I mean, he still sees it as his wife. He doesn't know what's happening, but he knows he lost control. Of course, he doesn't know what to do, and it is easy to lose your mind, I think, when you're in a cult, especially at the point where you're thinking of leaving, and that. People do suffer from mental illnesses because of this. There's something wrong. You're not happy. at some level, you know you want to leave, but you don't know how. And it kind of drives you nuts. And I think a lot of people who are in cults are like that. I know I was like that for a long time. Suffered from depression as a witness. And it takes, it's very, very difficult. It takes its toll on you because you're trying to perform. You're trying to be something you're not, but you don't understand how to get out. So, yeah, it's I can definitely identify with that. He makes a run for it in the car, as you said. He's blocked at every turn, but he does get to the bridge. And, of course, he's got this fear of going over the water, but
And she looks relieved because she's like, brilliant, we're fine. And then they're not fine as they go. He forces her on the wheel to do it.
He does. He puts his foot on the accelerator pedal and off they go and closes his eyes, so she has to steer. But, so very brave, overcame his fear, but, of course, he's not escaped. There's more blockages, forest fire, overturned chemicals or whatever. All stopping him from leaving. So the point that you mentioned is when she shouts, "Do something!" when she thinks that he's going to attack her, and he kind of does. He grabs the knife from her, and it looks like I don't think he would hurt her, but she's obviously frightened, and she shouts, "Do something!"
They've already had this like psychotic drive, so I think she's a little bit on edge.
Yeah. And this is when we get that really sad, absolutely heartbreaking scene when he's talking to his best friend. And as you say, I think this is actually really good. So your point that you made before, that actually his best friend and everybody else is kind of a member of this cult. And literally, as he's confiding in his best friend is receiving instruction in his ear, what to say, the words to use. And again...
and it's devastating because I think he looks a bit guilty and sad to say it. I don't know if you got that as well, but I feel like he looks a little bit sad to me because there's a gap between him hearing it and obviously saying it. And I feel like if he doesn't look like he's like, this is good, I'm good. Do you know what I mean? It does feel a little bit guilty, but however he feels is sad either way.
Still doing it, and again, I felt this was very resonant. In these groups, in cults, the cult members are also trained in how to, scare quotes, help weak ones, people that are struggling spiritually. So there'll be, how do you help a weak person? And there'll be points on the platform, little demonstrations about how you can help weak ones, the sorts of things to say, how you can help them. And that's pretty much the same. It's almost like you've got an earpiece in and you are right. How do I do this now? Well, I've been told.
Well, there are scripts at the end of the day, and just because his being fed in through his ear, I mean, like as we've said previously, funerals, for instance, are very scripted. That very sad experience you're going through that deserves a personalized, genuine, authentic reaction is not given, and you get a very cut and paste scripted thing, and that feels very much like what's happening in that moment.
Absolutely. So I think it's quite interesting now. So what happens is at the end of this conversation, his best friend says, "You were right about one thing though," and this is where they bring his dad back. So he now, because he's seen his father, thought he'd seen his father, everybody tells him he's not. But now they've decided this is kind of, I guess, the last throw of the dice, really, to try and get him back. So here's your dad. So they're using all his close relatives. Now they've even got who he thinks is his dad, his mum, his wife, his best friend, all these close people to him. They're all manipulating him, trying to keep him in this cult, essentially, on this island. So they're leveraging close relationships, and that's what cults do. They leverage close relationships. If they don't have the close relationships like family relationships, then they encourage you to cut them away and form new ones so that you become reliant on them. So there's a bit in the film now where there's a bit of a break in a way for the story, because we get to see an interview with Christoph, who is the creator I should just mention the actors here. So Ed Harris is Christoph, and the guy that's interviewing him, I forget his name now. I can't find him on the list, but he's the guy who does The Simpsons, lots of the voiceovers in The Simpsons, Kent Brockman. And I couldn't help but think of Kent Brockman when he was talking, because of course he puts on that voice, that newsreader voice. But of course they think that Christoph is a genius, and this interview, and this is where we hear from, there's a bit of a phone in, and this is where we hear from Lauren, who is on the outside, of course, and she accuses him of being a terrible person, essentially. The interviewer, though, asks Christoph, why has he never doubted his world until now? Which I think is a really good question. So you kind of alluded to this already. And he says, and I'm going to read a couple of quotes here. So this is the actual words. He says, we accept the reality of the world with which we are presented, which I think's really interesting. And he says he could leave at any time if it was more than just a vague ambition. If he was absolutely determined to discover the truth, there is no way we could prevent him. So yeah, you've kind of touched on that already, but have you got any thoughts on that?
It's just, a way of covering your back, in the sense that you're like, well, he could, in terms of an ethical choice, but it feels a bit like the annoying sociologist argument, they can leave any time, why don't they?
That was exactly my thoughts. It sounds like apologists. This is not a controlling cult, because people can leave anytime they want to, and people do leave. So yeah, he does leave in the end, but
it was incredibly hard, and it didn't have to be.
So yeah, I think that's very interesting. And again, lots of parallels there. Okay, so let's pick up the pace a bit. So he's looking at himself in the mirror now, and something's changed. You sort of see that something's changed in him, and I think at this point he's made his decision to go, and he starts to make his plans to escape. Sleeping in the basement, manages to create some sort of looking as though he's asleep, and off he goes. He's trying to get away. Shows a lot of bravery, obviously, uses a boat, terrified of water, terrified of the sea, but overcomes his fears. But the desperation of the cult, the desperation of Christoph, the TV show, to keep him in is massive.
He nearly kills him.
Absolutely. Yeah. He'd rather see him dead, really.
Because, he says when he was born on TV, you can die on TV.
That's right. Yeah. And there is a desperation to keep people in these groups, or at least there seems it. So he manages, we see him almost drown, we see him overcoming these incredible difficulties to get out. Again, as somebody who's left a high control group, I know how that feels. Some groups are even more difficult, I think. There's definitely some that are, you really do take your life in your hands, and yet people do manage to escape. But this does not undermine the fact that it is a cult. Just because some people can manage to escape doesn't mean it's not a cult. But of course, he overcomes all those things, and he literally bumps into the edge of the world, bumps with a crash. He bumps into the real world, and he kind of starts to realize that there's something not right about the world. And he walks up what essentially is like Stairway to Heaven, really, isn't it? It's a great kind of metaphor there.
And the TV creator
speaks
to him from the heavens.
This is God, isn't it? And I just thought, this is like the pictures. Now, this is a very old book, but when I was growing up, we used to have the Truth book, and we used to have the Paradise book, and there was always this illustration of clouds and kind of these rays of sunshine coming down. Sometimes you see it when the clouds are in a certain way, and that's what we saw. And it's like Jehovah talking to him. And it's here where he still wants him to stay in the world. I don't know what he thinks this TV show is going to be if he stayed, but he really still wants him to stay in this pretend world.
I think he wants him to go back to pretending.
Yeah, even if you don't believe it. So this reminds me of when, so for Jehovah's Witnesses, if you get disfellowshipped, one of the reasons why many people come back and get reinstated from being disfellowshipped is because they are desperate to have their family again and their friends again, their community, even if they don't believe it. And in a way, the organisation doesn't care that much whether they believe it or not, so long as they come back. And I thought that's another parallel to that, really. So it doesn't matter if he doesn't believe it.
And also, if he's not, after doing our narcissist episode, if that man's not a narcissist, I don't know what is. He's literally got a god complex.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You can't leave, he says. You belong here. So he thinks that he has control over Truman, and he can decide where he should be and where he. I thought that was quite interesting. So yeah, so that's pretty much it. Of course, he the last thing we see is him saying his little line to God.
I love the bow, very sassy bow,
and he walks out the door. And that's the end of the film. Beautiful ending.
Wouldn't you love to see a film though afterwards that's like Truman taking them to court? I'd love it. Yeah.
So what happens afterwards? So this is something that I wanted to ask you about. So his life after this, what are the difficulties going to be for Truman?
So he'll probably want to talk about it, because he'll want to talk about his experience, as we know generally people do want to be able to say, you know, his life's been edited together into a story his whole life. He'd like to maybe have ownership over his own. And he'll probably be told by lots of people, you wanted to leave the show, why are you talking about it? Just get on with your life.
That's right.
Yes. You know, and he'll say, well, I want to have ownership over my own story. And they'll be like, oh, whatever, you chose to leave. And that'll be one of them.
Love it. Yeah, I love the little conversation you just had there. That was great. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, aren't you? And he'd come on this podcast and talk about it. Yeah, I think there's that. And he would also be quite paranoid, I think, about...
It'd be very hard to trust the world ever again.
Exactly.
I think, to call back to our favourite documentary, it would seem, in The Vow, when they're talking to the people, they're like, how do people end up in cults effectively? And they say that you must have been very trusting. And the body basically just goes, well, not anymore.
Yeah, and I think... So this is where I don't want to upset anybody, but I feel like we have addressed this before. So when you leave a cult that has controlled you in such a way, told you what to think, how to think, who to believe, who to not believe, and only listen to our instruction, only read our literature and so on. I do feel that there is quite a large number of people who come out of those groups and see conspiracy and this sort of control in everything. And I did want to talk briefly about some of the bigger themes in this film, because I think there's this, and there's The Matrix, and there's one or two others that are kind of similar, which is this idea that the new Apple TV series, by the way, that I recommend, called Silo, that's a bit like this as well. So the idea is that, you're in a world and you're lied about the world that you're in, and look behind the curtain at this other thing that's going on. And this essentially is a big conspiracy theory. So if you were to think about Truman finding out about what's happening, essentially he's realizing the conspiracy. So I know a lot of people who are conspiracy theorists look at things like the Truman Show, the Matrix. Of course, there's the red pill and the blue pill stuff. They look at that as a kind of analog for what's going on now, and that behind the scenes there's these puppet masters kind of creating the world and the pretend world that we're all being fooled by. And I think if you've been in a cult, I think that's really, it's very understandable to have those views. Of course, you could argue that if you're not thinking like that, you've just still got a hangover from the days when you were in the cult, and you're just believing things just the same as you were when you were in the group. So there's kind of two sort of alternate arguments there, but I feel that there's a risk that we essentially see a massive conspiracy behind everything. That's not to say that you should just believe everything that you hear or see. And you should always take everything with a certain pinch of salt, I think.
It's just not to swing completely to the other way, isn't it? I think, when you leave, take with you your newfound ability to question,
yes.
and also choose to believe in things. You have to question everything, but enjoy it. You're allowed to question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but you don't have to question everything, and sometimes consensus will be right, and sometimes it won't. But you could be exhausted, paralyzed. Just enjoy this life that you are now free to enjoy.
Yes. Yeah, I think there's definitely something to that. Yeah, for me, I think whether I'm watching legacy media, as they like to call it now, or whether I'm watching a YouTube video, I think it's a good thing to have a skepticism about what you're listening to. I don't see a problem with that. But what I don't believe is that it's all connected to some grand conspiracy. So that's the bit that I think, for me, by all means, question the things that you're being told, but to imagine that it's all part of the same single conspiracy. Truman was a single conspiracy. The Matrix is about a single conspiracy. But I think the real world, you've got probably lots of conspiracies, lots of people trying to manipulate the narrative, trying to get their own ideas across and trying to create a world that suits them best. Mostly rich people, mostly people with privilege, lots and lots of money want to keep it. And so they want to keep those systems in place. So for me, they're likely to be the motivations. It worries me that there is a belief that there's somehow a kind of big version of the Truman Show going on in the world, and that there's this kind of puppet master or puppet masters controlling literally everything. The Truman Show was very controlled. It was in a dome on an island. It was all controlled very, very carefully. Yeah, I don't personally see that as happening in the world, but that's just my opinion.
I don't think it's a rogue one to state. I don't think you have to prefix it, but yeah. Just, we're not all under a dome.
Some people think we are.
Well, and now they've left listening. I've ruined it for them. So sorry. The dome people have left us.
The flat earthers went a long time ago, I think. Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, I reckon that's it, Celine. I think we've done the Truman Show.
I reckon so.
Okay. So Truman Show starring Jim Carey, Laura Linney as Meryl, his wife, Ed Harris as Christoph, Natascha McElhone as Lauren, and Noah Emmerich as Marlon, his best friend. Whenever we do these sorts of episodes, people often put little comments and come back with ideas, extra ones that they thought. So that's great. It's always nice to see that and hear that. So yeah, feel free to reach out and tell us what you think. Cool. Well, thank you very much for listening, everybody. Check out our
socials.
Twitter.
Yeah. So I'm at Celine Rach on Instagram. That's where I live on the internet.
And there is a Cult Hackers Instagram page, which follows on that. I'm on Twitter, Steve O'Sheep, and also Cult Hackers again. So yeah, reach out that way, or of course you can reach out to us through the website, so you can send us a little message. We're getting more and more messages, more interaction, so that's really great. Thank you for that. I really do appreciate it. Don't forget to write a review, give us a rating on Apple Podcasts if you listen to us.
5 stars.
5 stars, only 5 stars. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Celine, and see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.